Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hi, Dave. Howard from Marin. Question, are the Browns intentionally trying to lose? They have just an awful offensive line, which can't be fixed. They got rid of Greg Newsome, seems like for the money. Dylan Gabriel is getting shell-shocked back there. It wouldn't matter if you put Shadur in or Tom Brady. I mean, it's just terrible. The offense is terrible. The question to you is, how long before they get rid of Kevin Stefanski and the general manager? We saw the guy at Penn State go. Who's next? Thanks a lot. Great show. Bye.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Let's welcome in Jake Burns from BrownsFilmBreakdown.com. Jake, let's start with Stefanski and Barry we'll talk about in a minute. But the offensive line, they're hurt and old. You can blame probably Andrew Barry for that. You were thinking that these guys, you get one more year out of them, but they haven't looked good. Greg Newsome, that trade doesn't bother me. I think Tyson Campbell is going to be a pretty good fit. I know he didn't have a great start, but they looked at Greg Newsome. Greg Newsome was going to make $20, $25 million, whatever it is a year, because he's playing pretty well, although didn't have a great debut in Jacksonville. And they said this guy fits a little bit more with what Jim Schwartz does, assuming Jim Schwartz is going to be there. The Newsome thing doesn't surprise me. I don't think it's a bad trade. There's cost certainty, and I think Campbell is a starting caliber cornerback, and I don't think there's any way that they're trying to lose. They're young and playing a lot of young guys, and it hadn't been good.
Yeah, there's a lot in that voicemail. To the point that like the players and coaches are trying to lose, obviously that's just not the case. Like I've always said, and I think this is as true as it gets, that like tanking is an outcome that can happen that clears itself up by the end of seasons, I think is the way to put it. And tanking usually comes from the front office, right? Choices of which players to have on the roster, sort of mandates maybe about how certain players are put on the field. But like coaches and players are going about games to win. You can't play football and you can't fake coaching football if you're trying to lose. So you're really looking at decisions. Now, I think it's probably too early to say that, they're tanking based on roster decisions and choices. I think at this point, it feels to me like they're going about ways and trying to win with what they have. And an understanding as a part of this season was that it might not go very well based on the fragility of the offensive line, which is still a lot of them had this year to deal with contractually, and you thought you could maybe spark them a little bit with a return to structure that they were more comfortable with under Kevin's earlier offensive days, obviously getting Bloomgren, who was a callback to a little more of what they dealt with, with Bill Callahan. And the results haven't been very good. Obviously, the tackles dealing with injuries hasn't helped anything, but the center guard has been uneven at times. Joel's been okay, but you haven't had the same. Posick and Teller's kind of been in decline for a little while here. So, yeah, you're dealing with, like, wear and tear of years of playing, and they're not winning the line of scrimmage, and that obviously leaks into everything you're trying to do as an offense. And you can, fair, like you said, you can get mad at Andrew Barry about not rectifying that sooner, but this is sort of the fallout of contracts where you give these guys in their prime a deal, and then the end of those contracts – you're dealing with like how to work your way out of them, right? And giving those guys a chance to finish those contracts based on what you paid them, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, it's, that mixture of you sign guys, you got their best years. Now you're kind of working through the end and how you're going to work through the regression of guys at an older age. And injuries have impacted that, obviously. That's a big part of things. So, if your offensive line isn't good enough, though, in the modern NFL, you're really going to struggle to find many explosives, period. So you're working through that, obviously, as best you can. And I don't think it's helping anything this year. And you can certainly look and say, did they not prepare? But also, they drafted Zenter, they drafted Whippler, they drafted, I think it's fair to say going out and getting Tevin Jenkins was about trying to make this unit's depth better, right? You can kind of look at the tackles, but Cornelius Lucas had a pretty good year last year. You thought you were getting maybe healthier versions of Jack Conklin, who's had an all of a sudden elbow injury. I get it. I mean, I think your hands are a little tied there. I do think they wanted to draft a tackle when their spot came up for the Schlesinger and Judkins picks, but those guys that were in that range went at the end of the first round. So the thing you could probably maybe turn your head and look sideways on was like taking Mason Graham over Armand Membo, who's the young man out of Missouri that went to the Jets at the top of the first round. So there's a lot of shoulda, coulda, woulda. I understand their thought process and how they were trying to go about it, but it's obviously like their attack approach of this just hasn't worked. And you deal with that fallout how you deal with that fallout. But I think it, like, looking at this offensive line and calling it a tank job, I don't think is the fair way to go about it. The same with Greg Newsome, like you illuminated. I personally think they're pretty even players at best, and it's about cost control at an important position for years to come, especially 26. We'll see what 27 and 28 have to deal with, but you didn't want to go into this offseason thinking you needed another competent corner opposite Denzel, because you got to go look at tackle, wide receiver, quarterback. Obviously, there were so many important things that are going to be on your plate this offseason. So then adding another corner into the fold would have just been a lot for one offseason. So I think anybody who's stressing and calling the trade with Newsome and Campbell anything other than a deal meant to protect the future while kind of making a lateral trade for a corner that you still think kind of fits your way of approaching defense, I think is just looking for something to complain about, in my opinion. But there's no doubt some of the choices that have been made have indicated to me that, like, obviously we're trying to win, but we're also comfortable with getting the highest draft picks possible simultaneously. So that's the world you live in when you're dealing with looming gigantic cap hits that are coming with Deshaun Watson and the difficulty that'll be there.
Yeah, and relative to Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry, I think that's to be determined. The rest of the year will tell you. I can't say for certain they're gone. I can't say for certain they're back. It's to be determined.